This morning I'm going to start off by telling three stories. One of forgiveness, one of restoration, and another one of the kind of reconciliation that I think Paul is talking about in his letter to Philemon. Sometimes we in church, and especially pastors, throw around these words: forgiveness, restoration, and reconciliation. But what does it mean to be forgiven, to be restored, to be reconciled? Is there a difference between forgiveness, restoration, and reconciliation? So first, the story of forgiveness. A flash of silver. That's all Nettie, a mental health counselor, recalls about driving to work on the morning of August 10th, 2011, when another car swerved into her lane, hitting Nettie's sedan head-on. With her right leg pinned under the dashboard in the front seat, Nettie drifted in and out of consciousness for almost an hour while firefighters rescued her. In the emergency room, convinced that she was going to die, Nettie asked a nurse to pen a goodbye letter to her thin 13-year-old son, Dominic. "I told him how proud I was of him," she says, "and how I was sad that I had to leave." Her injuries were extensive, requiring 10 hours of surgery. Her spleen, her appendix, 2/3 of her colon and upper intestines had to be removed. Besides nearly losing her right foot, Nettie broke her right arm and shattered her right heel. For days it hurt just to breathe. And even I could feel the hospital gown against my skin, she said. Not until several weeks later, when Nettie began to recover, did her lawyer break the awful news to her. The 63-year-old woman who had caused the accident had a blood alcohol level well above the legal limit. "Before, I hadn't been angry. Accident happens," she said. "But who's drunk at 8:15 in the morning and driving around?" Her distress increased upon learning that the driver had minimal auto insurance and that Nettie, who had been recently separated from her husband, would now be saddled with the hefty hospital bills. The last straw came the day before Thanksgiving when her boss announced that Nettie would be let go. "I was so depressed," she said. "For the next 6 months, I got Dominic off to school in the morning and then spent the rest of my day sleeping." She despaired every time she thought of the drunk driver who had brought on such hardships into her lives. All that devastation took a toll. The following spring, Nettie started taking antidepressants and seeking therapists. In our sessions, I worked on acknowledging my anger and hurt and letting go of those feelings. It was so hard to do, she admits, but asking why me over and over again was getting me nowhere. In August of 2012, Nettie was in the courtroom when the woman who had caused the accident was sentenced to 16 months in jail. The woman looked so scared, she remembers. I couldn't imagine what was going through her head. Afterward, Nettie approached the public defender and said, "Please let your client know that I forgive her." The gesture gave Nettie a huge sense of relief. I wasn't in control of her actions that morning, but I am in complete control of how I respond from here on out, and I decided to choose forgiveness over hate and animosity. Every day, I find something to be grateful for, she says, but I couldn't feel that gratitude without forgiveness. Now a story about restoration. In a garage in Palo Alto, California, two nerds were working on a small device that would change the world. Apple Computers was founded on April 1st, 1976, by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Steve Jobs was the idea guy and handled the business side of things, while Wozniak was an engineering expert. Neither of these young men had any experience running a company. They began selling their Apple I computer, which was mostly a hobbyist machine. And then they worked on the Apple II, an upgraded version of the Apple I. and sales increased. In December of 1980, Apple computers went public and continued to grow. But both Jobs and Wozniak realized they didn't really know how to run a large corporation, and so they sought help. In 1993, Steve Jobs himself recruited the then PepsiCo CEO, John Sculley, with the now legendary pitch line, "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life, or do you want to come with me and change the world?" At that point, while Jobs did want to be the CEO, the board didn't think he was quite ready for it. The problem was that Steve Jobs had quickly earned himself a reputation for being difficult to work with. He sweated the details, often at the expense of his team's feelings and their deadlines. Things came to a head, though, in 1985. Under Jobs' guidance, the Apple had released the Lisa, the first ever computer with a graphical user interface. It was a technological marvel, although it was a total flop sales-wise. His follow-up project, the Macintosh, sold better, but it still wasn't quite enough to make a dent in the IBM's control of the PC market. Sculley moved to reassign Jobs away from the Macintosh product and essentially putting reins on the founder and his influence at Apple. In response, Steve Jobs went straight to the board of Apple, who ended up siding with Sculley. Here's where the stories differ. Steve Jobs would publicly proclaim that he was fired from Apple after that incident. Sculley has said that Jobs voluntarily left Apple after the showdown over the price of the Macintosh. Either way, Steve Jobs left the company that he had started with his friends in his parents' garage. Steve Jobs went on to form another computer company called Next, creating what they hyped to be the next evolution of personal computers. While the machine was technologically impressive, the prices were too high and the sales were slow. Meanwhile, back at Apple, Sculley got off to a hot start in the post-Job era. By 1991, they had introduced the System 7 operating system, which brought color to the Mac for the first time. And Apple also introduced the PowerBook laptop. Before too long, though, Apple began to lose focus, designing flops like the Newton Message Pad personal assistant that tried to read your handwriting but never did it all that well. Through the mid-90s, Apple continued to struggle with products that did not perform as hoped. Then Apple acquired Steve Jobs' company Next in early 1997. The move would bring Jobs back to Apple to give the company the much-needed shot in the arm. Soon thereafter, Steve Jobs was named interim CEO of Apple, or ICEO. Come on, that's funny. In 1998, Apple introduced the iMac, the smash hit all-in-one computer reinforcing the company's turnaround. In 2000, Apple officially dropped the interim from Steve Jobs' title, and he was officially restored as the head of his company that he started so many years ago. And now a story about reconciliation. There was once a rich mother who had 2 daughters. The rich mother had a great estate with many houses, a horse stable, and plenty of help to keep the place running. The younger daughter came to her mother and told her that she wished that she was dead, that she hated living in her house and under her rules, that she wished that her mom would give her her inheritance and let her leave the house. And so the mother, though deeply wounded and shamed by her daughter's request, did as the daughter had asked. She divided her wealth and gave part of it to the younger daughter, who took off for a foreign land. It was there in the foreign land that she began to live the life that she had always wanted. She attended club openings and hung out with the most famous people of the land. There were plenty of friends, booze, drugs, and parties to attend, but the lifestyle came at a cost. Soon her inheritance began to dry up. She began to put her lifestyle on credit cards, so that her friends wouldn't leave and the party would continue. However, soon the funds were gone, the credit cards were maxed out, and she found herself without friends in a foreign land. It was then that she realized that she could not work a normal job in this foreign land because she had not applied for a green card. Then she started working for some unsavory people who did not have her best interest at heart. At first, it was simply running the money for drug deals. Then it became trafficking the drugs themselves. Deeper and deeper she got in with these unsavory people, but she never seemed to be able to clear her debts and be able to move on. She continued to owe more and more money. As she went to jail for the second time for running drugs, she found herself thinking, don't my mother's hired hands have it better than me? They eat 3 meals a day, and they get to be with the horses. When the daughter was released from jail, she found what little money that she had and bought a bus ticket home. All that she now owned could fit into a single backpack. It was just a simple few changes of clothes, the few dollars that she had to her name, and all her credit card bills. As the bus arrived in her hometown, the daughter's return started rumors. As the daughter made her way out to her mother's estate, she continued to practice her speech by saying, Mother, I know that I have wronged you, hurt you, and made you ashamed. I'm not asking to come back as a daughter, but as a simple hired hand. Let me shovel the horse manure. I am so sorry. As the daughter rounded the corner to walk up the long driveway to the main house of her mother's estate, she saw her mother running down the driveway. As her mother got close, she began her speech, saying, Mother, I know I've wronged you. And her mother cut her off. My dear and lovely daughter, you made it home. You came back to me. You who I once thought was dead is alive. My daughter, my lovely, beautiful daughter. The daughter broke down in tears, trying to complete her speech, but the mother went on. My daughter, I welcome you back into my house, into my life, and into our business. Please give me everything you have. The daughter was taken back by this statement. She reached into her backpack and grabbed her few remaining dollars that she had and handed them to her mother. Mom, this and a few changes of clothes is all I have left. And the mother says, I don't think it is. Again, the daughter, trying to figure out what the mother was referring to, brought out her ragged clothes and handed them to her, saying, I have these clothes left. You can have them, I guess. And the mother said again, this isn't all of it. Finally, with frustration and annoyance on her voice, the daughter said, Mom, all I have left is all my debt. Surely you don't want this as well. And the mother said, I told you I wanted everything. That includes your debt. I will pay it off. With tears running down both their faces, they walked towards the house where the welcome party had already started. And as the daughter walks in, she is welcomed with joy from everyone, including her sister. Not only is she welcomed back into the family, but she was also given a seat at the table with her sister and her mother on the board of the family company. These concepts or ideas of forgiveness, restoration, and reconciliations are all playing a part in the story we find ourselves in Philemon. Paul is calling Philemon to forgive Onesimus for what he has done. Onesimus has wronged Philemon in many ways. Here's a few words on forgiveness. Forgiveness is often more for the person who was wronged rather than the one being forgiven. Nettie was not going to have a relationship with the person that hit her, but forgiving her allowed her to feel gratitude for every day that she was given. Now, forgiveness is not always easy. Oftentimes, we force our kids to say sorry to each other, and they don't really mean it, parents. But oftentimes in our lives, though, forgiveness can be one-sided. When somebody has harmed us and they have no intention of changing their way, we can forgive them for our own sake so that we can be free, but not continue a relationship with them. While I am going to talk and explore more about restoration and reconciliation, there are times we stop just at forgiveness. because we do not need to be in a relationship with somebody that is toxic or harmful to us. Now, a few words on restoration. This is a beautiful idea of gaining what was once lost, being put back in the place that we were before. It is restoring a car to look exactly like it did the day it came off the assembly line. Restoration, unlike forgiveness, is a two-way street. It takes the person that has been wrong and the person that was who did the wronging to be in relationship with one another. You can forgive somebody without being in a relationship with them. But sometimes this is what God is calling us to do, to forgive someone, to rebuild that trust, and restore them to their place in our lives. This is restoration. But then we have this word reconciliation. Paul here appeals to the power of reconciliation that is available through the cross of Jesus Christ. While Paul never mentions the cross, he alludes to the fact that Philemon and him are brothers in Christ because of the gospel of Jesus. Paul has the same relationship with Onesimus, now that Onesimus has become into a relationship with Jesus Christ. Paul also states that Onesimus and Philemon are now brothers because of this common relationship in Jesus. He says you welcome him back as a fellow man and as a brother in Christ. Philemon has every reason in the world to punish Onesimus when he returns. This runaway slave had wronged him, probably had stolen from him. He runs off, and now he's coming home. But Paul calls on Philemon to forgive him. In fact, even taking some of the responsibility on himself, saying that if he has wronged you in any way or owes you anything, Paul says, charge it to me, I will pay. Then he goes beyond that, and he says, welcome him back into your home, but no longer in his former position, no longer just restoring him to be a slave, but see him as something new now, as a dear brother. This makes no sense in the world economy. We have other slaves that might see this as a way to get out of slavery. But Paul is calling Onesimus and Philemon to see a new way of being in relationship with one another. The cross only holds true power for reconciliation between us and God when it holds implications for between us and others. Paul calls Philemon to be reconciled to Onesimus. This is beyond both parties saying that they're sorry. This is understanding that there's been hurt. This is understanding that there's been economic implications. This is understanding that there's been social implications. This is understanding that there's been spiritual implications, and being authentic in dealing with those and moving forward in a new level of relationship. Reconciliation is more than a simple sorry. It is a deep, powerful, robust, enormous, loving, changing, growing, compassionate, hopeful, caring, peacemaking, self-giving, life-empowering, fruit-bearing, confessing, faithful, confronting, engaging, sincere apology that is not said but lived. Christ's reconciliation is understanding what has happened and dealing with those implications in meaningful ways, and then through that, growing into a new relationship with one another. Notice the last story. The mother doesn't just simply welcome the daughter back to a lower place, or even to her place as a daughter, but welcomes her back in and gives her a seat at the table to help with the family estate. My friends, this is what Christ has done for us. And this, at times, is what we are called to do for one another. Amen.